If someone had told me that one moment could shatter the life I'd spent years building, I would have laughed it off. But life has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. On a cold autumn evening, everything I thought I knew about my wife, Claire, and the life we'd built together came crashing down. We'd been married for 12 years. 12 years of shared dreams, arguments, laughter, and quiet nights on the couch. Ours wasn't a perfect marriage, but it was ours. At least, that's what I thought. Claire was the kind of person who brought light into a room. She had an energy about her that I envied. Outgoing, adventurous, the type of person who could start a conversation with a stranger and leave them feeling like an old friend. I'd always been more reserved, content to observe while she stole the show. It worked for us. Or at least it used to. Lately, though, something had shifted. It was subtle at first, so small that I convinced myself I was imagining it. She started coming home later than usual, always with a perfectly reasonable excuse. Work ran late, traffic was awful, she bumped into a friend and lost track of time. Then there were the little changes, things I might not have noticed if I hadn't known her so well. She started putting more effort into her appearance. New clothes, a gym membership, skincare routines she'd never cared about before. She said it was for herself, that she wanted to feel good again after years of putting the kids first. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? But as the months went on, the distance between us grew, and the doubts I tried to ignore started gnawing at me. The night of the accident started like any other. Claire was out for her regular girls' night, something she swore was essential for her sanity. I was home with the kids, going through the usual bedtime routine of brushing teeth, reading stories, and answering endless questions about why the sky was blue and where dinosaurs went. By the time the house was quiet, I was on the couch with a beer, flipping through channels. I checked my phone once or twice, expecting a text from Claire saying she was on her way. But the hours ticked by, and when my phone finally buzzed, it wasn't her name on the screen. "Is this Mr. Williams?" a man's voice asked, calm but urgent. My heart sank. "Yes, it is. Who's this?" The words that followed hit me like a punch to the gut. Accident, hospital, critical condition. My hands shook as I tried to process what he was saying. "Is she?" My voice cracked. "Is she okay?" "She's stable," he said. "But you should come right away." I barely remember the drive to the hospital. The streets blurred together under the orange glow of streetlights, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. What happened? Was she alone? Why hadn't she called me? The ER was a blur of bright lights and chaotic movement, the smell of antiseptic thick in the air. A nurse directed me to a waiting area, where I sat, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. After what felt like hours, a doctor appeared. His expression was calm but serious, the kind of practiced neutrality that made my stomach churn. "Your wife is stable," he said, his voice steady. "She's lucky. The injuries could have been much worse. She has a broken arm and some bruising, but no internal damage. She'll make a full recovery." Relief washed over me, leaving me weak. "Can I see her?" "She's asking for you," he said. The sight of Claire lying in that hospital bed stopped me in my tracks. She looked so small, so fragile, her arm in a cast and bruises mottling her pale skin. I pulled a chair close to her bedside, taking her hand in mine. "Hey," I said softly, "you're okay. That's all that matters." Her eyes filled with tears, spilling over onto her cheeks. "Luke," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm sorry." I frowned, squeezing her hand. "Sorry for what? You don't have to be sorry. It was an accident." But she shook her head, her tears falling faster now. "No, it's not just that," she said, her voice trembling. "There's something I need to tell you." "Claire," I said gently, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just rest." She shook her head again, more forcefully this time. "No, Luke, you don't understand. I can't keep it in anymore." The tone of her voice sent a chill through me. This wasn't just the rambling of someone shaken by an accident. This was something deeper, something darker. My chest tightened as I searched her face, trying to understand what she was about to say. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come right away. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't place. Part guilt, part fear, part something else entirely. "I need to tell you the truth," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Before it's too late." I froze, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a stone. 100 possibilities flashed through my mind, each one worse than the last. The seconds stretched on as she struggled to speak, her tears falling freely now. And then, with a shaky breath, she began. Claire's breathing hitched as she gripped my hand, her knuckles white against my skin. "Luke," she began, her voice barely audible, "I've been lying to you." The words hit me like a jolt, but I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. Her eyes darted to the ceiling, as if searching for the courage to go on. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said. "I swear. I never wanted to hurt you." The room seemed to shrink around me, the faint beeping of the heart monitor growing louder in my ears. "What are you talking about, Claire?" I asked, my voice steady but strained. She hesitated, her tears blurring the soft green of her eyes. "The accident," she started, her words trembling. "I wasn't alone in the car." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning closer. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "He was with me. We were fighting. I was trying to make him leave, and that's when I lost control of the car." "Who, Claire?" I demanded, my patience hanging by a thread. "Who was with you?" She swallowed hard, her eyes locking with mine. "Andrew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It took me a moment to process what she just said. Andrew, my best friend, the man who had been a constant presence in our lives for years. We'd gone to college together, stood by each other at our weddings, celebrated milestones, and weathered losses. He wasn't just a friend. He was family, and now, the name that once brought comfort filled me with a rising wave of anger and disbelief. "What?" I asked, my voice a low growl. Tears streamed down her face as she tightened her grip on my hand. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It started small, just talks, confiding in each other. You've been so busy with work, and I felt invisible. Andrew was there, and I let it happen. I let it get out of control." I pulled my hand away, the weight of her confession crashing over me. "You're telling me you've been, what? Sneaking around with him? While I'm working my ass off to provide for this family?" She nodded, her sobs breaking her words apart. "It wasn't like that at first. I swear. It was just emotional. But then it wasn't." The air felt heavy, suffocating. I stood, pacing the small hospital room as her words echoed in my head. Every interaction between her and Andrew played back like a film reel, details I had dismissed now taking on a sinister edge. The way he always seemed to know what she liked, the inside jokes they shared, the lingering hugs that I'd once thought nothing of. It had all been right in front of me, and I hadn't seen it. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold. She hesitated, her silence answering the question before she did. "A year," she said finally, her voice breaking. "It's been a year." I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to me. "A year," I repeated, the words heavy on my tongue. "You've been lying to me for a year." To my face. And him. He sat at my table, played with my kids, pretended to be my friend. And the whole time, "You too." I couldn't finish the sentence. Claire sobbed into her hands, her shoulders shaking. "It wasn't just you, Luke. I was lost. I didn't know who I was anymore. I felt like I was drowning, and Andrew, he made me feel seen." "Seen?" I snapped, turning to face her. "You felt seen? And that makes this okay? You don't think I felt lost? Overwhelmed? But I didn't crawl into someone else's bed for comfort." "I know," she cried. "I know I was wrong. I hate myself for it. That's why I needed to tell you. I couldn't keep lying to you. Especially not after the accident." My chest tightened as I remembered her earlier words. "The accident," I said. "What happened, Claire? Tell me everything." She wiped her face with trembling hands. "We were driving back from a hotel. I told him it had to stop, that I couldn't keep doing this to you, to the kids. He got angry, said I was being dramatic. We started arguing, and I told him to get out of the car. He refused, grabbed my arm, and she broke off, her voice faltering. You what? I demanded. I swerved, she admitted. I was trying to scare him, to make him leave. But the car spun out of control, and we crashed. When I woke up, he was gone. He left me there, Luke. He just left me. Her words hung in the air, a twisted mix of guilt and betrayal. I couldn't speak, couldn't think. The woman I thought I knew had just confessed to breaking my trust in the worst possible way, and the man I had considered a brother had abandoned her when she needed help. It was almost too much to comprehend. You're telling me, I said slowly, that not only did you betray me with Andrew, but you lied to me about what happened last night? You made me think this was just an accident, when all along it was because of him. Claire nodded, her tears soaking into the hospital pillow. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to know the truth. I stared at her, my emotions a chaotic storm of anger, pain, and disbelief. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make her feel even a fraction of the hurt she had caused me. But instead, I turned and walked toward the door. Luke, she called after me, her voice desperate. Please don't leave. Please. I paused, my hand on the doorframe. Without looking back, I said, I'll be back. But right now, I can't even look at you. And with that, I walked out, the weight of her confession pressing down on me like a vice. I didn't go home after leaving the hospital. I couldn't. The thought of walking into the house, the place where we had built our life together, made me feel sick. Every room would be a reminder of Claire's betrayal. Every photo on the wall another piece of evidence that our marriage had been a lie. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the city, the streets lit by the faint glow of streetlights and the neon signs of closed shops. My hands gripped the steering wheel as my mind replayed her words over and over. Andrew. The name alone sent a wave of anger through me. He had been my best friend for years, someone I trusted completely. How could he do this? How could she? And how had I been so blind to all of it? The realization that it had been going on for a year only deepened the wound. A year of lies. A year of stolen moments. A year of them laughing behind my back while I was out working, providing for the family I thought we shared. Eventually, I parked at an empty overlook on the edge of town, the city lights sprawling below me in a shimmering blur. I turned off the engine and leaned back in my seat, letting the silence envelop me. For the first time since Claire's confession, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, they crashed over me like waves, each one more intense than the last. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to let out the rage that was tearing me apart. But instead, I sat there in the dark, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of it all. At some point, I pulled out my phone and stared at Andrew's name in my contacts. I hadn't called or texted him since the accident. The idea of hearing his voice made my blood boil, but the need for answers was stronger than my anger. My thumb hovered over the call button for what felt like an eternity before I finally pressed it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. I hung up without leaving a message, my frustration mounting. The second time I called, he picked up. Luke. His voice was groggy, like I'd woken him up. It's late. What's going on? My grip on the phone tightened. Don't play dumb with me, Andrew. You know exactly what this is about. There was a pause, and I could almost hear him scrambling for an excuse. Look, man, if this is about Claire. Of course it's about Claire. I snapped. She told me everything. The messages, the meetings, the hotel. All of it. You sat in my house, Andrew. You played with my kids. You looked me in the eye and lied to my face. Luke, listen, he started, but I cut him off. No, you listen, I said, my voice shaking with fury. You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to make excuses. You betrayed me in the worst possible way. And for what? Because you couldn't keep your hands off my wife? He sighed heavily, and the sound made my skin crawl. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said. It just did. I didn't plan for this, Luke. Neither of us did. I laughed bitterly. That's what she said. It just happened. Like that makes it okay. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed everything. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quiet. I really am. Sorry doesn't cut it, I replied. You don't just get to apologize and walk away from this. You need to understand the damage you've caused. I know, he said, but there was no conviction in his tone, no real remorse. It was just words, empty and meaningless. Stay away from me, I said finally. Stay away from my family. If I ever see you again, I swear to God. The words hung in the air, unspoken but clear. I ended the call before he could respond, throwing my phone onto the passenger seat. My chest heaved as I tried to calm myself, but the rage inside me burned hotter than ever. I stayed at the overlook until the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. By the time I returned to the hospital, I had made a decision. Claire might have confessed, but that didn't mean I was ready to forgive her. Not yet. Not ever. When I walked into her room, she looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Look, she said softly, her voice raw with emotion. I spoke to Andrew, I said, cutting her off before she could say anything else. Her expression faltered, and she looked away. What did he say? She asked, her voice barely audible. It doesn't matter, I replied. What matters is what happens next. She nodded slowly, her hands twisting the edges of the blanket in her lap. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, she said. I'll go to therapy. I'll cut him out of my life completely, whatever you need. I stared at her, my emotions warring within me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could fix what had been broken. But another part of me, the part that was still raw and bleeding, couldn't see past the betrayal. I don't know if that's possible, I said finally, my voice heavy with exhaustion. You didn't just break my trust, Claire. You destroyed it. And I don't know if it can ever be repaired. Her tears fell again, silent and steady, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. I need time, I said, standing to leave. I'll be back for the kids. But for now, I can't be here. Her sobs followed me as I walked out of the room, the weight of her confession still pressing down on me. I spent the next few days staying at a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions and anonymity feels like a warm blanket. The quiet hum of the air conditioner and the faint smell of stale coffee in the lobby became my only companions. I needed space, a chance to think without Claire's voice echoing in my ears or the sight of our family photos staring back at me from the walls of our home. Every time I closed my eyes, her words played on a loop in my mind. It just happened. I didn't mean to hurt you. I couldn't focus on anything else. Work emails went unanswered. My phone buzzed with messages from Claire that I refused to open. Even Paul, who had been my closest confidant during rough times, reached out to check on me, but I didn't have the energy to explain what had happened. How could I put into words the depth of the betrayal I felt, the way my chest tightened every time I thought about her and Andrew together? It was during one of those sleepless nights in the motel that I made a decision. I couldn't let this define me. I couldn't let Claire's actions, or Andrew's, destroy everything I'd worked so hard to build. If I was going to move forward, I needed to take control of the situation, not just for my own sanity, but for the sake of my kids. Next morning, I called a lawyer. Sitting across from her in a sleek office that smelled faintly of leather and fresh paper, I laid everything out. The messages, the hotel, the accident. I told her I wanted full custody of the kids and a clean break from Claire. Do you have evidence? She asked, her tone calm but firm. I nodded, sliding my phone across the desk. She scrolled through the screenshots I'd taken of Claire's messages with Andrew, her expression unreadable. This is solid, she said finally, looking up at me. But we'll need more if we want to ensure custody. Can you confirm that the affair impacted the children's well-being? I paused, the weight of her question sinking in. Claire had always been a good mother. Whatever else she had done, she loved our kids deeply. But the thought of sharing custody with her, of sending my children into a home where Andrew might still lurk in the background, made my stomach churn. I'll find what you need, I said. The lawyer nodded. Good. This won't be easy, but if we're thorough, you have a strong case. Leaving her office, I felt a flicker of determination. For the first time since Claire's confession, I felt like I had a purpose, a way to channel my anger and heartbreak into something productive. But as I drove back to the motel, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Luke, it's Andrew. Please, can we talk? Just once." I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. The nerve of him to reach out after everything he had done. My first instinct was to delete it, to block the number and pretend it didn't exist. But another part of me, the part that craved closure, hesitated. Against my better judgment, I replied, "Meet me at the diner on Main. 30 minutes. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, the faint smell of frying bacon and coffee lingering in the air. Andrew was already there, sitting in a booth near the back. He looked different, disheveled, his eyes shadowed and his usual confident demeanor replaced with something that almost resembled guilt. Almost. "Look," he said as I slid into the seat across from him. "Thanks for meeting me." "Space me the pleasantries," I said coldly. "What do you want?" He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I messed up, and I know you probably hate me, but I needed you to hear it from me." "Hear what?" I snapped. "That you slept with my wife? That you lied to my face for a year? Trust me, Andrew, I don't need to hear it. I already know." "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said, his voice cracking. "It started when Claire came to me, saying she felt alone. She needed someone to talk to, and I was just there." "Save it," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You're not the victim here. You had a choice, Andrew. You could have walked away, but instead, you decided to destroy everything. And for what? Was it worth it?" His eyes dropped to the table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "No," he said after a long pause. "It wasn't. I lost everything, Luke. You, Claire, everything that mattered. You didn't lose me," I said. "You threw me away. Just like you threw away every ounce of respect I ever had for you." Andrew didn't respond, and for a moment, the only sound between us was the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Finally, I stood, tossing a few bills onto the table. "We're done here," I said. "Don't contact me again. Don't contact Claire. And if I ever see you near my kids, so help me." I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. As I walked out of the diner, a weight lifted from my chest. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was enough. Enough to let me focus on what mattered, moving forward. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, emotional confrontations, and a constant battle to stay strong for my kids. I moved back into the house, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Every corner of it carried memories of Claire, of the life we'd built together, now tainted by her betrayal. The laughter we once shared over family dinners, the quiet moments of sitting on the couch after the kids were asleep. All of it felt like echoes of a life I didn't recognize anymore. Claire stayed with her sister, leaving me to sort through the aftermath alone. She called a few times, but I didn't answer. Her texts piled up, messages filled with apologies and pleas for understanding. I couldn't bring myself to read them. Every time her name lit up on my phone, it was like ripping open a wound that had barely started to heal. I threw myself into creating a sense of normalcy for the kids. My lawyer's words echoed in my mind. "You need to show stability." That became my mantra. I adjusted my work hours, cutting back on late nights and delegating more responsibilities to my team. I made sure to be home every evening, cooking dinner, helping with homework, and tucking the kids into bed. Every moment I spent with them reminded me why I was fighting so hard. They didn't deserve the chaos Claire had brought into our lives. One evening, as we sat on the living room floor building a castle out of blocks, my 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, looked up at me with wide, serious eyes. "Is Mommy coming home soon?" she asked, her little voice breaking the quiet. I froze, the block in my hand hovering mid-air. How do you explain something so complicated to a child? I forced a smile, placing the block on top of the castle. "Mommy and Daddy are trying to figure some things out," I said carefully. "But no matter what, we both love you and your brother very much. That will never change." Sophie tilted her head, considering my words, before nodding slowly. "Okay," she said, turning back to the blocks. I watched her for a moment, my chest aching. How much did she understand? Did she notice the way Claire's absence lingered in the air? Did she hear the tension in my voice when I spoke about her mother? I didn't know. But one thing was clear. I couldn't let them feel the weight of this. They deserved better. The court hearing came faster than I anticipated. The sterile atmosphere of the courtroom, with its hard benches and quiet murmurs, felt surreal. Claire looked pale and tense as she entered. Her shoulders slumped and her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. Her lawyer walked beside her, carrying a briefcase that I imagined held every excuse she could come up with. When my lawyer presented the evidence, I watched Claire's face carefully. She flinched as the messages were read aloud, her eyes darting to the judge, then to me. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap as the timeline of her affair with Andrew was laid out in meticulous detail. The photos, the accident, the nights she had spent away from home. All of it painted a picture she couldn't deny. When it was her turn to speak, she stood slowly, her voice trembling as she addressed the court. "I made mistakes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I made choices that hurt my family, and I'll regret them for the rest of my life. But I love my children, and I would never do anything to harm them. They're my world, and I want to be there for them. I know I've let them down, and I know I've let Luke down, but I'm asking for a chance to make it right." Her words stung, but I stayed focused. When it was my turn, I stood and faced the judge, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I don't question Claire's love for our kids," I said, "but love isn't enough. They need stability, consistency, and a safe environment. Claire's choices have put all of that at risk. This isn't about punishment, it's about what's best for my children." The judge's expression was unreadable as he listened to both sides. The deliberation felt like an eternity, the weight of the decision pressing down on me with every passing moment. When the ruling was finally announced, I felt a wave of relief so profound it left me lightheaded. Full custody was granted to me, with supervised visitation for Claire. It wasn't a victory, not really. There was no joy in seeing her break down in tears, no satisfaction in hearing the pain in her voice as she thanked the judge for the limited time she would have with our children. But it was what had to be done. The days that followed were quiet but full. I threw myself into creating a new routine for the kids, one that felt stable and secure. I enrolled them in a new after-school program, planned weekend trips to the park, and made sure their days were filled with laughter and activity. Slowly but surely, the house began to feel like ours again, a place of warmth and love rather than pain and betrayal. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, I found a box of old photo albums. Flipping through the pages, I saw images of our life before everything fell apart. Vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings spent opening gifts by the tree. For a moment, I felt the familiar ache of loss, the weight of what could have been. But then I heard the kids laughing in the backyard, their voices bright and full of life, and the ache faded. Claire came by once a week for her supervised visits. She was polite, distant, and clearly trying to rebuild her connection with the kids. I let her. They deserved to know their mother, even if our marriage was beyond repair. One day, after the kids had gone to bed, I got a call from Claire. Her voice was soft, tentative, as if she wasn't sure I'd answer. "Thank you," she said, her words carrying the weight of everything she couldn't say, "for letting me still be part of their lives." "It's what's best for them," I replied, my voice calm but detached. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I'm sorry, Luke, for everything. I know it doesn't change what I did, but I need you to know that." Her apology hung in the air, a fragile thing that felt both genuine and hollow. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Months passed, and life slowly began to settle into a new normal. The chaos of court dates and legal battles had faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of our daily routine. The house, once filled with tension and painful memories, now felt lighter, warmer. The kids adjusted faster than I had expected, their resilience reminding me just how much strength they carried in their small frames. Claire's weekly supervised visits continued, and while they were cordial, they never extended beyond the time allotted. I made sure to keep things professional, for the sake of the kids, but I kept my distance emotionally. She always arrived on time, her demeanor quiet but sincere, as if she was trying to piece together what was left of her relationship with them. I never interfered, but I couldn't ignore the pang of unease every time she left. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself sitting on the back porch, a glass of whiskey in hand. The stars were scattered across the sky, faint and distant, and the cool night air carried the faint hum of crickets. I hadn't allowed myself much time to think over the past few months. Every day had been consumed with work, parenting, and keeping the house running, leaving little room for reflection. But now, in the quiet of the night, the weight of everything hit me. I thought about Claire's apology, the one she had offered over the phone. At the time, I had dismissed it, unwilling to let her words soften the edges of my anger. But now, with the benefit of distance, I wondered if I had been too harsh. She had made mistakes, massive, unforgivable mistakes, but she was still the mother of my children. And despite everything, part of me still wanted to believe that she was capable of redemption. The next morning, Claire arrived for her visit, and for the first time in months, I didn't retreat to another room while she played with the kids. Instead, I stayed in the living room, watching quietly as she helped Sophie with a puzzle and laughed at one of Ben's endless stories about dinosaurs. She looked up at me once, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, but she didn't say anything. When her visit ended, I walked her to the door. "Thanks for letting me stay longer," she said, her voice cautious. "Don't read too much into it," I replied, though my tone lacked the sharpness it once held. "I'm doing this for them, not for us." "I know," she said, nodding, "but I appreciate it anyway." After she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step towards something less bitter, less heavy. Weeks turned into months, and life continued its slow march forward. The kids flourished in their new routine, their laughter filling the house in a way that made it feel alive again. I found a rhythm at work that allowed me to be present at home, and I even started attending a local support group for single parents. Sharing my story with others who understood my struggles helped more than I expected. Then one day, out of the blue, I received a letter from Claire. It was handwritten, the kind of gesture that felt oddly intimate in a world dominated by texts and emails. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready to read what she had to say. But curiosity won out, and I unfolded the paper, her familiar handwriting filling the page. "Luke, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you, for the lies I told, for the way I destroyed the trust we built. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret what I did, not just to you, but to our family. I've been working on myself, trying to understand why I made the choices I did. It's not an excuse. I know there's no excuse for what I did, but I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm in therapy now, and it's helping me see things more clearly. I know it's too late for us, but I hope that one day, you can look at me and not see the worst thing I've ever done. I hope that one day, you can see me as someone who's trying to be better, not for myself, but for our kids. Thank you for being the father they need, for giving them the stability I couldn't. They're lucky to have you, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn the privilege of being in their lives. Take care of yourself, Luke. You deserve happiness. Claire." I read the letter twice, my emotions a mix of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. It didn't absolve her, not by a long shot, but it felt genuine. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was capable of change. Months later, as I stood in the backyard watching the kids play, I realized that I had found a kind of peace. Life wasn't what I had imagined it would be, but it was still good. The laughter of my children, the simple joy of a sunny day, it was enough. And as I looked toward the future, I knew I would be okay.